Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, that it enjoy.
C-26, Attack on Asgard, P2. Caleb walked over to the terrace, his footsteps immediately catching the trio's attention. The second he got closer, he spotted Jane's painfully awkward expression. She was standing beside the queen like she desperately wanted the marble floor to open up and just swallow her whole. "Did I interrupt something important?" Caleb asked, gesturing vaguely with his hand. "Should I give you guys some space?" Thor quickly shook his head, flashing him a welcoming smile. "No, you haven't." The Crown Prince stepped forward, basically trying to close the awkward gap between his two very different worlds. "Caleb, please meet my mother, Frigga, Queen of Asgard. And this is Jane Foster, my girlfriend." He then turned toward Frigga and Jane, resting a heavy, respectful hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Mother, Jane, this is Caleb, a brave and strong warrior of Midgard." Jane's eyes practically popped open. Her scientific curiosity instantly bulldozed straight through whatever embarrassment she'd been feeling a moment ago. "Midgard, Earth." She looked between Thor and Caleb in disbelief. "Didn't your father just say no mortals were allowed in Asgard? Also, how did he even get here?" The moment she realized how blunt she'd sounded, Jane winced hard and immediately tried to walk it back. "Oh, God, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be so." Caleb just chuckled and casually waved off the apology with an easygoing grin. "Not an issue at all. It's a fair question." "It is quite the tale," Thor interjected, his tone turning serious as he explained Caleb's extremely unusual journey. Thor kept going, completely improvising as he told them about all the suffering Caleb had supposedly endured on Sakaar and how he eventually made his way back here. Of course, most of the information had originally come from Caleb himself. But somewhere along the way, Caleb started wondering if Thor was even talking about him anymore. Because this dude was straight up making stuff up now. He kept adding extra details, dramatic moments, and unnecessary suffering that had never actually happened. In reality, Caleb hadn't suffered all that much on Sakaar. Sure, the food was absolutely terrible, and his first day there had been a complete nightmare after Vorik utterly destroyed him. But after that, things had gotten pretty manageable. Still, Caleb wasn't about to stop Thor. If the God of Thunder wanted to make his story sound more tragic and earn Caleb some sympathy points, who was he to complain? Honestly, free sympathy didn't sound bad at all. A heavy silence dropped over the terrace as everyone took in what Thor had just said. Frigga's warm eyes softened even more, filled with genuine maternal empathy. She stepped closer to Caleb, her expression turning gentle. "To be torn from your home so violently and thrust into such a brutal, unforgiving world, you have endured far more than any mortal should have to bear, Caleb." Jane looked at him with a completely different level of respect now. Whatever awkwardness she'd been feeling was long gone. "That's terrible," she added softly, shaking her head. "I can't even imagine being stranded alone on an alien planet like that. You must have been terrified." But almost as quickly as Jane's sympathy kicked in, her scientist brain straight up hijacked the entire conversation. Her eyes suddenly lit up as she started scanning Caleb like he was some walking science experiment. "Wait, but how did you survive the gladiatorial arenas? How did you get this strong? Did the spatial fluctuation alter your cellular structure? Did Sakaar have a different gravitational pull that forced your muscles to adapt? Or was there ambient radiation?" Thor quickly placed a gentle hand on her back and gave her a light pat, basically trying to calm down that insanely curious side of her. "Jane, perhaps we should let the man breathe before interrogating him." Caleb just smiled and casually lied through his teeth without even missing a beat. "I have no idea, maybe it was that space fluctuation or something that messed with me. I didn't even know I had any strength until I actually found out about it in my first fight." "Really?" Jane muttered, her brow furrowing. Her mind was clearly somewhere else now, probably running through a dozen calculations about wormhole radiation, human biology, and God knew what else. Caleb chuckled, deciding it was probably better to steer the conversation towards something a little less complicated. "Honestly, what I really missed out there was the food. The stuff on Sakaar was just really shitty. I am really thankful to you, Thor, for letting me have such a feast yesterday." He was being completely genuine about that. Sure, his current body didn't actually need food to survive, but come on. Who the hell was going to turn down genuinely delicious food just because they didn't technically need it? Leaning against the marble railing, Caleb stared out across the golden horizon of Asgard. "I wonder how Earth has been these past 2 years, he reminisced out loud. Deep down, Caleb knew this Earth wasn't exactly his original Earth. But it was still Earth. And Caleb was absolutely planning to head straight there through the Bifrost once the whole Malekith and Ether mess was finally dealt with. Hearing the wistfulness in his voice, Frigga gave him a warm smile. "You can have more if you want," she spoke, her voice soothing. "I will ask the royal chefs to prepare another feast for you." Caleb smiled back. This woman is really kind, he thought. She was nothing like the arrogant, disconnected gods most people would probably expect. She just had that warm, caring mother vibe. I'd really appreciate that, he said politely. Before Frigga could say anything else, a loud sound of Asgardian alarm horns blasted across the Golden City. Caleb's expression changed slightly as he knew this was the start of the invasion. Thor's relaxed vibe disappeared instantly. His hand shot out, and with that familiar crack of thunder, Mjolnir came flying out from the palace halls before slamming directly into his grip. Jane jumped and looked around in alarm. What is that? What's going on? An Einherjar guard came sprinting onto the terrace. His armor clanked with every step, and he was breathing heavily like he'd just run for his life. My queen, my prince, the guard shouted, his eyes wide with urgency. It's the dungeons. The prison has been breached. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened, the leather around the handle creaking under the pressure as his jaw locked up. He immediately turned toward his mother. Mother, go, I will take care of her, Frigga promised. Thor then looked at Caleb. Caleb, my friend, I must secure the dungeons and find my father. Please stay with them. Caleb nodded, his expression turning dead serious. With one quick spin of his hammer, Thor launched himself off the balcony, shooting across the Asgardian sky like a freaking comet as he headed straight for the prison sector. Frigga didn't waste even a second. She grabbed Jane's arm, gentle but firm. Come with me, both of you. Caleb followed right behind them as Frigga led them away from the exposed terrace. She moved fast, cutting through a bunch of private corridors and taking them farther and farther from the main halls. His senses were completely locked in. He could hear the distant booms of explosions, followed by the chaotic shouting of Einherjar somewhere below them. The prison break was officially underway. Curse, Malekith's loyal hound was doing exactly what he was supposed to do. As they turned around a massive gilded pillar and entered a wider hallway, they almost ran straight into a heavily armed group of Einherjar coming from the opposite direction. Leading them was Odin himself, and the Allfather looked absolutely pissed. He didn't even acknowledge Frigga, Jane, or Caleb at first. His entire focus was on deploying his soldiers. Send squadrons to the weapons vault, Odin barked, his booming voice cutting right through the screaming alarms. Defend the dungeons. Yes, Allfather, the guards shouted in unison. They immediately split off, rushing down the intersecting corridors to carry out his orders. Once the guards were gone, Odin finally turned toward Frigga. His hard, battle-ready expression softened just a little when he saw his wife, though the tension in his jaw was still obvious. His gaze briefly shifted toward Jane. Yeah, he still wasn't exactly thrilled about having a mortal wandering around his palace. Then his eye moved to Caleb. It stayed on him for barely a second, but there was no irritation when he looked at him, just pure curiosity. Then his attention returned to Frigga. Frigga stepped forward, her voice calm, though there was a definite edge of concern underneath it. Odin moved closer, trying to sound reassuring. Though honestly, it came across more like a king trying to convince himself that everything was totally under control. These are prisoners of war, Odin said, his voice steady and dismissive. It's a skirmish, nothing more. Yeah, just a little skirmish. Nothing to worry about, except for an ancient, revenge-obsessed army of dark elves currently sneaking into your airspace with the goal of plunging the entire universe into eternal darkness, Caleb thought but didn't say out loud. Frigga didn't exactly look convinced by that either. You've never been a very good liar, Frigga replied softly, her voice carrying a quiet but heavy weight. Take her to your chambers, Odin instructed, his voice dropping to a more personal, protective tone as he subtly gestured toward Jane. I'll come for you when it's safe. Frigga held his gaze for another moment before giving him a small, firm nod. You take care, she murmured, the worry of a wife briefly slipping through that royal composure. A faint, almost sad smile tugged at the corner of Odin's mouth. Despite all I have survived, my queen still worries over me. Frigga reached out and gently placed a hand against his golden armor. It's only because I worry over you that you have survived. Odin placed his hand over hers for a brief second, clearly drawing a little strength from the touch. Then, just like that, the soft husband disappeared and the king was back. Without saying another word, he turned sharply and marched down the corridor, his golden cape whipping behind him as he headed straight toward the chaos. Caleb stood a few steps behind, arms crossed, quietly watching the whole exchange. Honestly, even with a freaking war breaking out around them, you could still feel the centuries of history between these two. They weren't just some royal couple putting on appearances. There was real affection there. The kind that had survived centuries of battles, arguments, kingdoms, and probably a whole lot of family drama. But there wasn't exactly time to stand around appreciating it. Frigga immediately turned back toward them, her attention snapping fully into focus. Come, she ordered and led Caleb and Jane farther into the royal palace and finally into her chambers. Frigga's room was huge, filled with the same soft golden light that seemed to be everywhere in Asgard. But the peaceful vibe was completely gone thanks to the distant explosions shaking the palace. The Dark Elves had broken into the royal section. Frigga didn't waste a second. She moved fast, heading straight for a weapons rack and grabbing a slim Asgardian sword. The warm, motherly look she'd shown Caleb a few minutes ago was completely gone. Now she looked like a queen ready to throw hands. She turned toward Jane, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Listen to me closely. You must do exactly as I say." Jane looked terrified but was doing her best not to lose it. She quickly nodded. "Okay, what do I do?" Frigga raised her free hand, and golden magic spread through the room. It washed over Jane, and within seconds, a perfect illusion of Jane appeared in the middle of the room. As the illusion manifested completely, the divine wheel appeared above Caleb's head. After rotating with a loud clank, it disappeared. Immediately, Caleb could see through the intricacies of the illusion Frigga had cast, allowing him to easily differentiate between the real Jane and the fake one. The appearance of the wheel and its sound immediately drew both women's attention. What was? Jane couldn't finish her question before Frigga took her to one corner of the room. She then hid Jane in one of the secret places in her chambers and told her not to come out unless she said so. Jane nodded, still looking confused. Frigga then raised her hand and muttered a quiet spell. Golden magic spread across the entrance, and the hidden door smoothly closed on its own. A second later, the passage was completely sealed, blending into the wall like it had never been there in the first place. Then Frigga looked at him. She took in how calm he was. No shaking, no panic, nothing. For a normal Midgardian, he was handling this way too well. "I do not know the full extent of your strength, Caleb of Midgard," Frigga said, gripping her sword. "But if they break through and something happens to me, please protect her. Do not let them take the girl. Hold on until my son and husband arrive." Caleb nodded before replying, "Although Thor and I have only just met, and I know you're more than capable of protecting yourself, I give you my word, Thor's mom. As long as I'm alive, they won't reach either of you." The next second, the massive golden doors to Frigga's chambers were violently shoved open. Malekith, the ruler of the Dark Elves, stood in the doorway. C-27, Malekith. Malekith's bone-white armor was spotless, and the strange mask covering his face started breaking apart like black sand. It disappeared, revealing his pale, scarred face and pitch-black eyes. He stepped inside. His attention immediately went to the fake Jane. He could sense the ether inside her. But standing between him and his prize was the Queen of Asgard and a man. Frigga didn't move back even an inch. She raised her sword, standing completely straight, her expression full of defiance. "Stand down, creature," Frigga warned, her voice echoing with royal authority. "You may still survive this." Malekith gave her a cold, arrogant smile. He looked at her like she was nothing more than some annoying obstacle in his way. "I have survived worse, woman," Malekith replied with disdain. "Who are you?" Frigga demanded. "I am the ruin of Asgard," Malekith stated, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. He didn't even seem to give a fuck about Caleb standing off to the side. His arrogance had him completely focused on Frigga and the ether. "And I would have what is mine," he finished. Caleb's got ready to step between the Dark Elf and the Queen. But before he could even close the gap, Frigga's free hand shot out, blocking him. "Let me," Frigga said, her eyes never leaving the Lord of the Dark Elves. "We still need to know how to get the ether out of her." Caleb loosened up and casually stepped back. He had no problem letting her handle this. Hell, he already knew exactly how this was supposed to go. Frigga wasn't just some illusionist. Raised by witches, she was also a seriously cracked swordswoman who had straight-up embarrassed Malekith in a one-on-one fight in the original movie. The only reason she'd eventually gone down was because Malekith pulled out his biggest cheat code, Curse, his loyal hound. That monster had an absolutely ridiculous amount of raw strength. This was the same beast who could casually smack Mjolnir out of the air and then beat the current Thor into the ground with his bare hands. So yeah, Caleb knew the real problem was coming. Let her deal with the arrogant elf, Caleb thought, rolling his shoulders while keeping his senses locked in. "The heavy hitter is mine." Seeing the mortal back off, Malekith sneered. He pulled a jagged blade made of dark metal from his side and immediately rushed at the Queen, moving with the freakishly fast speed. Frigga casually knocked away his opening downward slash with a smooth flick of her Asgardian short sword. Steel slammed against steel with a sharp clang, sparks flying across the floor. Malekith spun with the momentum and came around with a nasty horizontal cleave, but Frigga simply ducked underneath it like it was nothing. As she came back up, her blade sliced a clean, shallow line across the abdomen of his pristine bone-white armor. Malekith snarled and took a step back before thrusting his free hand forward. A massive blast of dark, shadowy energy exploded from his palm. Frigga shut that shit down instantly. With a quick flick of her left wrist, a golden, geometric mandala of Asgardian magic popped into existence. The shield completely ate the dark blast, breaking it apart into harmless wisps of black smoke. Before Malekith could even process what just happened, Frigga was already on him. Malekith desperately thrust his blade forward, trying to keep her away, but Frigga knocked it aside, stepped straight into his guard, and smashed the heavy pommel of her sword right into his jaw. The dark elf stumbled backward, black blood running from the corner of his mouth. Whatever arrogant confidence he had a second ago, gone. His eyes widened in pure disbelief. He swung wildly at her, but Frigga slipped past the attack and struck his wrist with the hilt of her sword. His fingers immediately went slack, and the jagged dagger slipped from his grasp, clattering across the stone floor. And in one smooth motion, Frigga swept his legs right out from under him. Malekith slammed onto his back, the impact knocking the air straight out of his lungs. Before he could even move, Frigga's blade was already resting against his throat. She stood over the Lord of the Dark Elves without so much as breaking a sweat, looking every bit like the absolute badass warrior queen she was. "Yield," Frigga commanded, her voice dangerously calm. Suddenly, Frigga felt a small gust of wind tear through the chamber. Her eyes snapped upward, and she saw that Caleb had somehow appeared directly in front of her. His right hand was already raised, casually blocking an incoming fist. Curse's enormous fist had stopped completely against Caleb's palm. Caleb glanced over his shoulder toward Frigga, looking completely relaxed. "Ma'am, you continue the interrogation, I'll look after this guy." Before Curse could even pull his fist away, Caleb moved. His left hand suddenly drew back with terrifying speed. Then Caleb drove his fist straight into Curse's chest. He put every ounce of his physical strength behind that single strike. The resulting impact sounded like an explosive bitchin' bam. Several sections of Curse's armor shattered instantly under the force, and his massive body was launched backward like somebody had fired him from a cannon. The sheer force sent him crashing through the floor several meters away and directly out of the chamber doors. For a moment, the entire chamber went completely silent. Malekith simply stared at the scene with his jaw hanging open. That was Curse, his most trusted and terrifying servant, and now the creature he considered his ultimate ace had just been casually launched. And the bastard responsible hadn't even looked remotely strained afterward. Frigga didn't know much about Curse, but seeing Malekith's expression and his wavered confidence, she concluded that Caleb's opponent was immensely strong. That impression was immediately backed up by Caleb's power comparison ability, which had already revealed just how freakish Curse's physical stats were. Curse possessed over 200 tons of raw lifting strength while Caleb possessed only around 110 tons himself. Normally, that difference should have made the matchup heavily favor Curse. But lifting strength wasn't the only thing determining striking power. Speed, durability, body mechanics, and physical reinforcement all mattered tremendously. And Caleb had an absolutely ridiculous advantage in those areas. His speed was vastly beyond what Curse could properly react against, and even durability was slightly greater than Curse too. That combination turned Caleb's physical strength into something genuinely terrifying, and this was without counting Caleb's kinetic absorption and release ability. Still, Curse wasn't some random brute who would drop from one heavy punch. Curse suddenly pushed himself out of the crater, shaking chunks of broken stone from his armor. His movements looked completely pissed off rather than injured, and those glowing eyes immediately locked onto Caleb again. Without wasting another second, Curse lowered his massive body and charged forward with enough force to shake the floor beneath his feet. "Okay, big guy, round 2 already." Caleb grinned as he walked towards Curse, who swung his enormous arm toward him. Caleb simply stepped aside, then he casually planted one foot against Curse's chest. Later, his leg exploded forward with ridiculous force. Boom! Curse's massive body was launched backward once again, flying out of the chamber. But he got back up, again. The monster shook his head violently before immediately charging back inside. This time, however, he wasn't coming in empty-handed. As Curse approached, his massive hand suddenly reached toward his waist. He grabbed something attached there and violently ripped it free. Then he threw it directly toward Caleb. Caleb's eyes narrowed. His senses instantly picked up something strange coming from the device. His body moved before the object could even finish crossing the room. Caleb thrust his palm forward. A concentrated burst of kinetic energy erupted from his hand. Boom! The shockwave slammed directly into the device. The strange object shattered instantly into countless fragments. Still, that didn't stop what the object was meant to do. A massive black circle suddenly formed exactly where the device had been destroyed. The center of the phenomenon looked completely unnatural, almost like space itself had been carved open and replaced with an endless void. Seeing it, Caleb remembered that it was the black hole device which Loki had used to defeat Curse in the movie. A powerful force immediately began pulling everything around it inward. Broken stones started sliding across the floor. Loose pieces of armor were dragged toward the black circle and even dust and debris began spiraling violently into its center. Caleb, despite standing several meters away, could still feel the pull against his body. It wasn't overwhelmingly strong from his current distance, but the sensation was definitely there. Caleb's eyes narrowed with interest. Well, that's definitely something. He could have easily destroyed the device before it ever activated. With his current speed, Curse's throw had practically happened in slow motion. But Caleb hadn't done that. He had finally found an opponent whose physical abilities were actually worth testing himself against. There was no way he was going to waste that opportunity. Clank, the familiar metallic sound suddenly echoed through the chamber. Above him, the wooden metallic wheel appeared and completed a rotation. His body instantly adapted to the strange gravitational force generated by the black phenomenon. This particular adaptation manifested as a new supernatural principle within Caleb. Gravitational anchoring. His body could now automatically adjust to outside gravitational forces, letting him stay put even when some crazy directional gravity tried to yank him around. And the more intense the gravitational force he was exposed to, the more his adaptation would kick in, making him stronger and better at resisting that shit over time. Noise, Caleb couldn't help but mutter under his breath. C28, Curse got deleted. Seeing his ultimate trick completely fail to even make Caleb flinch, Curse let out a furious, guttural roar. He completely ditched whatever strategy he had left, charged straight at Caleb, and started punching and kicking the absolute shit out of him. Well, at least he tried to. Because none of that beating did anything to Caleb. In fact, these types of raw, physical beatdowns were literally the worst possible attacks anyone could ever use against him. Caleb didn't even bother raising his hands to block, nor did he try to dodge the devastating blows. He just stood there casually, letting the monster's fists and boots slam into him while his ability passively absorbed every single ounce of their kinetic momentum. While Curse was busy using him as an indestructible punching bag, Caleb was actually thinking about the whole ether situation. His thoughts went back to the moment he'd first seen Jane on the palace balcony. The moment he got close to her, he felt a tremendous, overwhelming force practically throwing itself at him. He didn't know if lusting was the best word to describe it, but honestly, what the hell else was he supposed to call that feeling? The cosmic force inside Jane, the ether, seemed to resonate with some kind of frequency within Caleb. It wasn't exactly talking or mind-reading kind of conversation, but both Caleb and ether seemed to understand each other. Ether had actively reached out, basically screaming that it wanted out of Jane and into him instead, presenting a clear and desperate desire to abandon its current host and use Caleb's body instead. It was practically begging him to let it make the jump. God only knew why the sentience behind the reality stone would do something so incredibly weird as asking permission in the first place. And moreover, why him? Why couldn't it be Thor, with his incredible lifespan? Was his body really that damn good, or was the thing somehow attracted to his almost Wolverine-level healing ability, which gave it what was basically an endless supply of life force? Caleb honestly had no clue. Regardless of the ether's motives, Caleb hadn't given it permission to jump ship. The reason was simple: unless there was a proper, controlled removal process, the ether violently tearing its way out of Jane's body on its own would cause serious, permanent damage to her system and most likely kill her on the spot. Caleb absolutely needed the ether to become stronger, but he wasn't some cold-blooded asshole who was going to build his power by casually letting an innocent woman die. Right then, he was abruptly pulled out of his internal monologue when his heightened senses picked up Toupee rapidly approaching the chamber. He glanced over his shoulder just in time to see Odin and Thor storming into the room. Thinking Caleb was finally distracted, Curse saw what he believed was his golden opportunity. The massive monster ditched his completely useless beatdown and immediately made a mad, desperate dash straight toward Frigga. He didn't even make it 2 steps when Caleb casually reached out and snatched the hulking beast by the back of his neck, straight up lifting the bastard off the ground like a misbehaving cat. Curse was heavy, probably weighing in at around a ton, but for a guy like Caleb, whose lifting capacity comfortably exceeded 100 tons, the terrifying dark elf enforcer was basically nothing more than a paperweight. Caleb walked toward the royal family, effortlessly carrying the suspended monster with one hand. Curse furiously tried to break the iron grip, flailing his massive arms and kicking his legs wildly like an overgrown toddler throwing a tantrum, but he couldn't even make Caleb's fingers budge an inch. Malekith paused, staring in complete disbelief at the ridiculous sight of Caleb casually walking toward them with Curse hanging from his hand like some oversized piece of luggage. While Thor quickly stepped forward, relief washing over his face. "Thank you," the god of thunder said earnestly. "Thank you for protecting my mother and Jane." Caleb just shook his head, offering a casual grin. "Honestly, man, someone like your mother doesn't need my protection. She had the situation completely handled." Frigga, who had already dusted herself off while Odin stepped in to take over the interrogation of the defeated Malekith, offered a warm, graceful smile. "Nonsense," Frigga corrected gently. If you had not been here to intercept this beast, I very well might not have lived to save the day. Hearing this, Odin paused his interrogation. The Allfather looked up from the bruised and beaten Lord of the Dark Elves, turning his single, piercing eye toward Caleb. Then, Odin offered a single, deliberate nod, a quiet gesture that said more than words ever could. Odin stood up from where Malekith lay beaten on the floor. "Thor, watch him," the Allfather commanded, his deep voice leaving no room for argument. Leaving the Lord of the Dark Elves in his son's custody, Odin walked towards Caleb. He stopped right in front of the flailing curse, who was still desperately trying to free himself from Caleb's effortless chokehold. Without a single word, Odin raised his golden scepter, Gingnir, and tapped its glowing tip directly against Curse's exposed chest. Instantly, the monstrous beast froze. A blinding light consumed his massive body, and in the blink of an eye, the terrifying dude completely disintegrated, turning into a cloud of golden dust that spread across the stone floor and vanished into nothing. "No, my training dummy," Caleb screamed internally, his hand now awkwardly gripping nothing but empty air. He had absolutely no idea Odin was just going to casually erase the dude from existence like it was no big deal. He hadn't even gotten a proper workout in yet. Fine. I'll just ask Thor to train with me later, Caleb thought, feeling mildly annoyed by the sudden loss of a perfectly good punching bag. Still, his annoyance quickly faded into genuine awe as his ability gave him a read on Odin's power levels. Holy shit, the MCU really did nerf the hell out of this guy in the movies. Looking at his raw physical stats, which were an absolute menace even without factoring in the legendary Odin Force, Caleb instantly realized something. If this old man hadn't died, there was no way in hell Thanos would have ever dared to even look in Earth's direction, let alone launch a full-scale invasion. Odin was built different. "Mother, where's Jane?" Thor's voice echoed through the room, snapping Caleb out of his thoughts. Frigga smiled reassuringly and waved her hand gracefully. An illusion at the back of the chamber dissolved, revealing Jane Foster perfectly safe in a hidden alcove. Thor immediately rushed over and pulled her into a light, relieved hug. The touching reunion lasted all of 2 damn seconds. Jane awkwardly and quickly pulled away from the God of Thunder, shrinking back slightly when she noticed Odin intensely eyeing her with a heavy, deeply disapproving glare. Unlike Jane, Caleb didn't receive the same treatment from Odin. The Allfather didn't exactly welcome him with open arms, but he also didn't make Caleb feel like an outsider or treat him with the same disapproval he had shown Jane. With that awkward moment out of the way and Jane safely back with them, everyone's attention inevitably returned to the pressing issue at hand. The ether was still inside her, and it was only a matter of time before her mortal body gave out. Odin turned his piercing, one-eyed gaze back to the bloodied Lord of the Dark Elves pinned to the floor. "Now," the Allfather rumbled, gripping his scepter as his voice echoed with dangerous, kingly authority. "You will tell us exactly how to extract the ether from the mortal's body, Malekith. Or you will find that Asgardian mercy has its limits." Malekith spat a mouthful of black blood onto the stone floor, his pitch-black eyes burning with nothing but hatred. Despite being beaten, chained by Asgardian magic, and completely surrounded, the Lord of the Dark Elves still refused to give up even an inch of that arrogant attitude. "You think you have won, son of Bor," Malekith sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "The ether is tethered to her very soul. You cannot save her. Your precious Asgard is nothing but a fleeting illusion built on stolen realms." He thrashed violently against his glowing restraints, staring daggers at the royal family. "It will burn, Odin. Your witch of a wife, your pathetic children, and you will all rot in the dark. I will watch your golden realm crumble into dust." He let out a harsh, guttural laugh, completely ignoring the way Thor's knuckles turned white as he gripped Mjolnir. Malekith just kept spitting out every vile curse he could conjure in his ancient tongue, throwing enough verbal poison at the entire Asgardian bloodline to make the whole room tense up. A chilling, dead-eyed calmness washed over the Allfather's weathered face. "Oh, he fucked up," Caleb thought, crossing his arms and watching the scene unfold with keen interest. That cold, emotionless stare immediately reminded Caleb that long before Odin was the benevolent, peace-loving ruler of the 9 realms, he was the absolute menace who had ruthlessly drowned the universe in blood alongside Hela. Malekith hadn't just insulted a king. He had basically walked up to a sleeping monster and kicked it in the damn face. Odin casually stepped forward, his one eye completely devoid of mercy. He grabbed Malekith by the braid and looked back at his family and the 2 mortals. "Wait here," Odin commanded. "I will return shortly." He turned away, dragging Malekith by his braid as the dark elf struggled helplessly, pulling him away from Frigga's chambers and deeper into the palace's private depths. "And when I do," Odin added coldly, "he will talk." The sheer, unspoken promise of violence in Odin's tone hung heavy in the suddenly silent room. Nobody in the chamber needed to ask what was about to happen on the other side of that door. Odin was going to get the exact ether extraction method out of Malekith, and judging by the look on his face, he really didn't give a damn how many pieces he had to break the elf into before getting his answer. Thor shifted uncomfortably. Jane looked slightly horrified by the implication, and Frigga simply closed her eyes and let out a quiet sigh. Caleb just smiled, leaning back against a stone pillar. Yeah, note to self, never piss off the old man. C-29, Ultimatum. With Odin gone, a heavy silence dropped over the ruined royal chambers. Caleb pushed himself away from the stone pillar. Since Odin was busy playing bad cop down in the dungeons, this was basically the perfect chance to try communicating with the ether again. He needed to figure out whether the cosmic entity could detach itself without turning Jane's nervous system into confetti. Caleb hadn't exactly gotten the chance to test that during earlier, but now, with Thor and Frigga's trust firmly secured, they probably wouldn't freak out if he tried helping. The problem was, he couldn't just stroll over and start negotiating with a cosmic singularity like they were old buddies. If he suddenly dropped the fact that he knew everything about the ancient sludge possessing Jane, that would raise approximately a galaxy's worth of red flags. He needed to keep playing the clueless but ridiculously helpful powerhouse. So, Caleb started, gesturing vaguely toward Jane with a casual shrug. I know we just beat up a bunch of angry aliens over it, but what exactly is that thing inside her? All I know is that it's called ether something. Thor looked at him, still keeping a protective arm near Jane. Frigga, however, was the one who answered and explained everything about it to Caleb wholeheartedly too in everything. After the explanation was done, the silence returned. He pretended to actually process the Queen's little history lesson. In reality, he was already locking in, tuning his heightened senses back toward that bizarre, overwhelming frequency the ether had blasted him with on the balcony. And there it was again. That desperate, magnetic pull. The sentient cosmic force was practically buzzing through Jane's veins, completely aware that he was nearby and, from the feel of it, more than ready to jump ship. Caleb took a slow, deliberate step forward. He kept his body language as harmless as possible, making sure Thor didn't get the wrong idea and start going full protective boyfriend mode. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes meeting Jane's tired, confused expression. Then, gently, he held his hand out toward her, palms open and inviting. May I take a look? Jane didn't seem bothered by it. She extended her arm, letting it settle gently against Caleb's open palm. Caleb lightly dragged his index finger down the pale skin of her wrist. The reaction was immediate. A swirling, dark, liquid-like energy suddenly flared beneath her skin, following the movement of his finger perfectly. Frigga, standing nearby, watched the strange phenomenon with sharp, observant eyes. It is attracted towards you, the Queen observed softly, her voice carrying a mix of deep curiosity and caution. Caleb glanced up at her, slightly impressed. Could she actually understand the ether too? He wondered. But judging by the calm, calculating look in her eyes, he figured it was probably just centuries of experience dealing with advanced Asgardian sorcery. She'd seen enough weird magic in her lifetime to recognize the nature of many. Why is that so? Caleb asked aloud, keeping up the act. Whatever the reason, it lies within your own body, Frigga replied thoughtfully, her gaze moving between Caleb and the dark veins pulsing across Jane's arm. Your physiology, or perhaps your very life force draws it in. Try and see if you can communicate with it. Caleb nodded, as he was exactly going to do that. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, sinking back into that weird, wordless wavelength he somehow shared with the cosmic sludge. Is there a way for you to get out of her without tearing her apart? He asked through their bizarre, instinctive connection. The answer immediately pulsed back into his mind, carrying a heavy wave of frustration. No, Caleb felt a sharp stab of disappointment. The ether made one thing painfully clear: if there had been a safe way out, it would have already jumped ship the second it sensed his presence. It was just as stuck inside Jane's fragile mortal body as she was with it. Trying to force its way out on its own would wreck her system. But the ether wasn't done. Another sensation pushed its way into Caleb's mind, bringing with it a grim, unmistakable ticking clock. A biological ultimatum. Jane's mortal body was breaking down fast under the cosmic strain, burning out like some cheap wire hooked straight into a nuclear reactor. She didn't have much time left. 48 hours, tops, before her body completely gave out and she was gone. Caleb opened his eyes, disappointment and urgency written all over his face. He gently released Jane's wrist and looked toward the royal family, his casual attitude completely gone. Okay, so, I talked to it, Caleb said quickly, deciding there was no point sugarcoating things. The bad news is, it can't just leave without severely harming her. If there was a safe way out, it would have already jumped into me. He paused, looking directly at Thor with grim sympathy. And there's something else. It just gave me an ultimatum. Jane's body is failing under the strain. If we don't get this thing out of her within 2 days. He left the sentence unfinished, but that didn't stop the others from understanding what it entailed. Thor froze. His knuckles went white around Mjolnir as he gently pulled Jane closer, like his strength could somehow protect her from a cosmic countdown. 2 days, Thor muttered, his deep voice thick with dread. The color simply drained from Jane's face as she stared at her trembling hands, looking terrified and tiny. She definitely was regretting her curious nature of exploring of odd things now. Then we are entirely at the mercy of time, Frigga stated softly, glancing toward the doors Odin had disappeared behind. We must hope the Allfather's interrogation yields a method of extraction before the sand runs out. There was nothing else they could do. Caleb leaned back against his stone pillar again, his mind going a mile a minute as he watched Thor try to comfort a seriously shaken Jane. Did I actually made things worse by messing with the timeline? Was this the universe's twisted way of keeping some kind of cosmic balance? Was it basically saying that if I saved one life, Friggas, then he had to cough up another one in return? Bullshit, Caleb frowned. He wasn't buying that kind of randomous cosmic rule. He scowled, wondering if the universe was instead just trying to pile even more shit onto Thor's plate to force some tragic character development onto the God of Thunder. It reminded him way too much of what the narrative eventually did to Peter Parker, killing Aunt May, wiping out his entire life, and making his friends forget he ever existed, all for the sake of growth. But what the fuck was the point of that kind of character development? What good was gaining power or learning some deep-ass lesson if the price was losing everyone you actually gave a damn about? I'll definitely save Peter too, Caleb decided, locking the thought into place. He wasn't about to sit around and let the universe fuck over good people just because it wanted some dramatic bullshit. Just then, the heavy doors groaned open, snapping Caleb right out of his thoughts. Odin strode back into the chamber, his golden scepter gripped firmly in his hand and his face completely unreadable. There wasn't a single trace of the Dark Elf Lord behind him, and Caleb didn't even want to imagine what kind of brutal-ass Asgardian interrogation techniques had just gone down. Frigga and Thor immediately straightened, their attention snapping completely toward the king. Did you find a way, father? Thor asked instantly, stepping forward, his voice tight with desperate hope. Odin stopped in the center of the room. He looked unusually grim. The Allfather's single, piercing eye swept over Thor, lingered on Jane's pale face, and then slowly shifted to lock directly onto Frigga. There is a method of extraction, Odin finally spoke, but the only way the ether will release its current host without completely destroying her in the process, is if it is immediately offered another living vessel to possess. He continued after a deep breath, and it cannot be forced. It must be a body of the ether's own choosing, a host it actively desires. If not, the extraction would destroy the mortal's body. Well, Caleb said casually, rolling his shoulders. Good thing I happen to be exactly its type. In hindsight, though, Caleb couldn't shake the strange feeling that things were going far too smoothly. And that was exactly what made him uneasy. He had a nagging feeling that in near future he was probably going to regret getting this lucky. Whatever, future Caleb's issues are future Caleb's. Let that guy deal with it. With that thought, he looked over at the rest of the group. C30, ether got out. Odin's eye narrowed as he looked at Caleb and Frigga. He was clearly surprised that the mortal had so casually offered to take the ether. Before the king could ask why, Frigga stepped forward and broke the silence. The ether is inexplicably drawn to him, my king, Frigga explained calmly. She pointed toward Caleb. We witnessed it mere moments ago. Its dark energy practically begs to cross the threshold between Jane and him. If there is a vessel it actively desires, it is standing right here. Odin frowned at Caleb. Even if it desires you, boy, you do not understand what you are offering, Odin rumbled, his voice serious. This process is a transfer only. I cannot extract the ether from your body once it takes root. The only way it will ever leave you is if you die. Caleb, no, Thor muttered instantly. He stepped forward, almost blocking Caleb's path, his face filled with worry. I cannot ask you to do that. The burden, the cost is simply too high. Beside him, Jane quickly nodded. Her pale face was full of fear. He's right, you can't just throw your life away for me. I won't let you. Caleb leaned back and folded his arms. Inside, however, he was already thinking about Odin's warning. Was Odin actually right? Caleb remembered the movie pretty clearly. When Malekith eventually pulled the ether out of Jane, it hadn't immediately needed another host. It had simply floated in the air, swirling around like a bloody storm. Was it only able to exist outside a body because it recognized Malekith as its original master? Or was Odin simply wrong about how the reality stone worked? Caleb figured it was probably the latter. Odin was smart, sure, but he didn't know everything. He certainly didn't know everything about the Infinity Stones. Either way, they were running out of time. Caleb lowered his arms and looked Thor straight in the eye, dropping the polite guest act. Jane has less than 2 days to live. Do you want her to die? The blunt question hit the room hard. Thor flinched. Of course I don't, he stammered, clearly torn between his love for Jane and his sense of honor. But how can I ask you to bear this curse in her stead? You didn't ask, I offered, Caleb interrupted smoothly. Look, no offense to Jane, but I am far stronger than she is. I can handle it. For all we know, the ether and I can work out some kind of internal contract or understanding. He didn't bother telling them why he was so confident. Deep down, Mahoraga's adaptation was waiting. If the ether tried to tear him apart from the inside, his body would adapt to it. He wasn't going to suffer the same damage Jane had. Odin tried to warn Caleb again. Do not underestimate this weapon simply because it appears weak in its current mortal cage. Once it absorbs your life force and grows stronger, we do not know if it will remain cordial to you. You are inviting a parasite of infinite power into your soul. I'll take my chances, Caleb said flatly. He uncrossed his arms and walked to the center of the room, stopping beside Jane. He looked back at Odin, completely calm. Let's get this over with. Please do the transfer. The room went quiet as everyone realized what Caleb had just agreed to. Thor looked at Caleb, his eyes filled with gratitude. It made Caleb slightly uncomfortable. You are a far braver man than I realized, my friend, Thor said softly, gripping Caleb's shoulder. Asgard will never forget this noble sacrifice. I will never forget it. Your selflessness is a rare light in these dark times, Frigga added. She placed a gentle hand on his other shoulder, her eyes filled with tears. May the Norns watch over your spirit. Even Jane was looking at him like he was a doomed man walking toward his death. Caleb looked between the three of them, clearly annoyed. Okay, seriously, Caleb deadpanned, looking at the overly dramatic immortals. Why are you guys acting like I'm about to die? Thor and Frigga looked at each other for a long moment before letting out the same tired sigh. They clearly thought Caleb was using dark humor to hide how scared he was. Odin, however, wasn't interested in the joke. We cannot do this here, the Allfather declared, his tone leaving no room for debate. The release of such volatile cosmic energy will tear these chambers apart. Follow me. Without waiting for an answer, Odin turned and walked out of the room. He led them deeper into the palace, past the main halls and public areas, before taking them down into a restricted underground part of Asgard. Eventually, they reached a huge circular room made of dark stone and intricate golden designs. Odin walked to the center of the room. He lowered Gingnir and dragged its golden tip across the stone floor. Golden sparks flew from the spear, leaving behind a large circle of runes and the symbols glowed with power. It was a containment array, meant to keep whatever happened inside from damaging the rest of the palace. Sit within the circle, Odin instructed, stepping back and leaning against his staff. Both of you. Caleb walked into the circle without hesitation and sat down cross-legged. Jane followed a moment later. She looked a little unsteady as she sat across from him. Odin raised Gingnir and the golden spear began to hum as power gathered around it. I am about to start. The reality of what was about to happen finally hit Jane. She looked at Caleb with wide, guilty eyes. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. And, I am so sorry. Caleb gave her a lazy grin. Don't sweat it, he replied casually, leaning forward slightly. Just make sure you treat me to a sumptuous meal next time we're on Earth. Jane let out a small sigh, but before she could say anything else, Odin slammed the bottom of Gingnir against the stone floor. Clang! The runes suddenly flashed with bright light, forming a dome of golden energy around them. The air inside the dome became heavy. Static filled the room, mixed with the strange feeling of old magic. Odin began chanting in an ancient Asgardian language, leading the golden light from the runes to rise from the floor and move towards Jane. It then entered her chest like an invisible blade. Jane gasped and arched her back as her eyes rolled upward. The ether reacted at once. Slowly, the dark liquid began leaving Jane's body. It came out bypassing her skin and gathered between her and Caleb, swirling around like a storm. As the ether left her, Jane fell forward and caught herself with her hands. She breathed heavily as the terrible pressure inside her body finally disappeared. The ether floated in the air for a moment, looking like a swirling mass of red energy. Then it sensed Caleb and lunged at him, completely surrounding his body till it became wrapped in a red cocoon. After who knows how much time passed, the red cocoon tightened, shrinking until it sank directly into Caleb's skin. At first, it felt like liquid ice flowing through his veins. But that cold quickly changed into a burning hunger. The ether didn't just settle inside his body. It immediately began draining his life force to strengthen itself. It was doing exactly what Odin had warned him about. As the cosmic parasite drained him, Caleb's cells started regenerating at an insane rate. His body began producing life force far faster than normal. For every bit of life force the ether took, Caleb's body immediately created 10 more. The ether seemed confused at first. Then, strangely enough, it became excited. The dark energy pulsed as it absorbed more and more life force. It kept growing stronger as it fed on Caleb's endless supply of energy. It had never felt this satisfied before. Right then, the air above Caleb's head began to shake. A huge, 8-handled wheel appeared above him and completed a single rotation. Clank! Instantly, the endless absorption of life force by ether stopped. The wheel had created a new rule within Caleb's body, resulting in yet another supernatural adaptation that locked his life force firmly in place. Confused and angry at the sudden stop in the surge of the life force, the ether increased the pull of absorption. A violent struggle erupted inside his body as the ether unleashed its reality-warping power against Caleb's very being. Clank. As the eight-handled wheel completed its second rotation, another aggressive shift kicked in. His body didn't just defend itself anymore, it turned straight-up predatory. Caleb's cells locked onto the ether, and instead of letting the parasite feed, his body started actively absorbing its cosmic energy. The ether was pissed at this sudden, completely bullshit reversal. Refusing to become prey, it fought back like crazy, unleashing the raw, unfiltered power of an infinity stone straight into its host. The sheer flood of universal energy tore through Caleb's veins, pushing his physical vessel way past its limits. His muscles seized, his blood boiled, and his very skin started cracking under the insane, crushing weight of ether. Clank. Just then, the wheel appeared once more and completed another rotation. Caleb's body instantly went through another violent restructuring. His bones, tissues, and cellular makeup rapidly evolved, hardening and shifting until they could perfectly handle the crushing pressure of the reality stone. Enraged and desperate, the ether cranked up the force even more, trying to straight-up dominate Caleb's body. Clank. The wheel turned again to match the force, as it furiously and ruthlessly started ripping the energy straight out of the stone. For the first time since its creation, the ether felt fear. Completely helpless against this monstrous host, the sentient red sludge scrambled in panic. Abandoning its attack, it rushed toward the surface of Caleb's skin, desperately trying to break out of his body before it got completely screwed. Caleb's first instinct was to clamp down and trap it. He wanted to keep the Infinity Stone's power for himself. But just as he mentally reached out to force it back, Caleb Tingle, his innate danger sense, went absolutely nuts in his head, warning him of immediate, catastrophic danger. In a split second, he understood what was going on. If he backed an Infinity Stone into a corner with absolutely nowhere to escape, the ether would trigger an instinctive destructive burst of overwhelming universal force. The blast would turn him into microscopic fucking dust long before the eight-handled wheel could even register a turn to adapt. Gritting his teeth, Caleb made his choice. He released his internal grip, deciding not to hold onto the ether anymore. He hated losing such an insane prize, but he wasn't stupid enough to underestimate the raw, limitless power of the universe. A few feet away, Odin suddenly opened his eyes. The Allfather's gaze immediately locked onto Caleb. Without saying a word, Odin raised one hand. A cylindrical container suddenly materialized beside him, its surface covered in strange, ancient runes that seemed to glow faintly in the air. Right then the ether slipped out of Caleb's body willingly, flowing through the air as a stream of crimson energy. Odin quickly extended his hand, guiding the living substance toward the container. The ether resisted for only a moment before Odin's power forced it inside. The instant it crossed the container's threshold, Odin made a sharp motion with his hand. Click. The lid materialized into place, sealing the container completely. Ether slammed weakly against the inside walls, twisting and writhing like a living thing, but it could no longer escape. Caleb, who had been bracing himself for the sensation of losing something he had desperately wanted to keep, felt the pressure inside his body vanish. His eyes slowly opened and he observed his surroundings. Where is everybody? Caleb wondered as he saw only Odin standing there, an oddly cylindrical device in his hand. It seemed to have trapped the red sludge of the ether inside it, which had just escaped his body. It's been almost a year, boy. Do you expect them to cater to you all the time? Odin bellowed. Caleb's eyes widened in shock. Almost a year. He sat there completely stunned, unable to process what Odin had just said. C31. Yet another power-up. Before we start we need to talk about the elephant in the room. As I was going back through my previous uploaded chapters and saw one where Odin was back to his prime and some readers in the comments said that it was Cosmic Odin. Then they are wrong. He had recovered to his prime relative to MCU and not to comics. Though I'll be introducing comics plot slowly, but if we look logically, how can a nearly dying Odin recover back to his prime and the 2 of comics version where is actually an absolute beast? What I am saying is that almost all characters introduced till now are relative to their MCU versions except for the Grandmaster. And as per the conversation between Odin and Grandmaster, even Grandmaster doesn't have his cosmic powers with him due to some reason. So basically consider the characters appearing will have the level of strengths relative to MCU unless specified. Caleb swore it felt like not even 5 minutes had passed since he sat down here and the ether got transferred into him. So how the fuck had this much time passed? Thankfully, he didn't need to eat or drink to survive, or he would have straight up starved to death. Wait, no, Odin was literally right there, so he could have helped with that with his magic or whatever. But seriously, how the hell hadn't Mahoraga's adaptations adjusted to such a massive amount of time passing? Caleb was pretty damn sure none of the adaptations he'd gone through had anything to do with time. Could it be, Caleb thought, like how time worked differently on Sakaar? Did the reality stone create something like that here? After all, Jane had taken 5 hours to absorb the reality stone whole, while for her, not even seconds had passed. What are you, boy, and what is that wheel? Odin's stern question suddenly snapped him out of his swirling thoughts. As Caleb scrambled to come up with an answer, the Onide King suddenly changed his mind, waving a dismissive hand. Never mind, Odin muttered, turning around. Before Odin could walk away, Caleb quickly spoke up, how's Jane? And where are my friends Korg, Meek, and Victor? Where's Thor? Frigga is waiting for you outside. She'll tell you, Odin said, walking steadily out of the chambers without looking back. Just before completely disappearing through the grand stone doorway, the Allfather paused and added, know that you have my gratitude for saving my wife. Caleb sighed, still sitting inside the magic circle. Before finally deciding to get up, he used his ability to check exactly what the ether adaptation had done to him. As he looked it up, he found out that almost all the modifications were geared toward processing and defending against the chaotic energy of the reality stone. The first change was the insane boost to his durability. At this point, Caleb's skin, muscle density, and bone structure had gone way beyond Thanos. If he stood completely still and let heavy hitters like the Mad Titan or Hulk beat the ever-loving shit out of him for days, they wouldn't even be able to scratch him. And that was without even factoring in his kinetic absorption ability. That was just how fucking ridiculous his durability had become. There were still a couple of years left before Thanos finally kicked off his full-scale universal invasion, but Caleb could already treat a threat of that level like he was juggling a toddler. Well, as long as the Titan didn't have a full Infinity Gauntlet. As Caleb kept examining the changes, he quickly realized Mahoraga's adaptation hadn't stopped at simply making his body capable of handling the ether. The first major change was absolute immunity to universe-level reality manipulation. His body and very existence had adapted so thoroughly to the reality stone that even illusion magic, spatial and temporal distortions and atomic transmutation could no longer affect him. If someone tried rewriting his existence or turning his body into bubbles, the universe's own rules would basically bounce right off him. On top of that, his life force and vitality had become completely untouchable. No external force, parasitic spell, or soul-draining entity could absorb, siphon, or manipulate his life energy unless they possessed a baseline of power vastly beyond the reality stone itself. Then there was the evolution of his cellular structure. His cells had evolved beyond simply resisting foreign energy. They could now process and metabolize ambient cosmic radiation and magical energy, turning a part of it into kinetic energy. Finally, Caleb noticed another change deep within himself. He had gained a natural resistance to mind-reading abilities, along with an innate sense that could alert him whenever someone attempted to enter his mind. Caleb found it a little strange, considering that this seemed more closely related to the Mind Stone than the Reality Stone. Still, he wasn't about to complain. He welcomed the new ability with open arms. As Caleb went through the list of changes, he quickly noticed that Mahoraga's adaptation had upgraded more than just his strength and durability. His regeneration had gone through the roof, now surpassing even Wolverine's healing factor. His body could repair most injuries almost instantly, with cuts closing, broken bones realigning, and damaged tissue rebuilding within moments. His overall speed had also increased dramatically, pushing his top running speed close to 500 km per hour, while his reaction speed had become even more ridiculous, allowing him to perceive and respond to threats in less than 5 milliseconds. For someone who had once struggled to keep up with superhuman opponents, the difference was absolutely massive. Just from the sheer passive boost to his biology, the side effects alone had massively increased his physical power. His baseline muscle strength had shot through the roof. He could now comfortably lift up to 150 tons without even breaking a sweat. But the real kicker was the Infinity Stones. Thanks to his new resilience, he could now hold any of the Infinity Stones directly in his bare hands without rotting, burning, or dropping dead from their insane cosmic radiation. Sure, if a stone's malicious sentience or raw power was directly unleashed against him as a concentrated one-shot attack, it might still disintegrate him. A sudden, curious thought crossed his mind. Why is my body so damn obsessed with turning everything into kinetic energy? If I keep storing all this crazy force, will I eventually be able to punch hard enough to shatter entire planets? He frowned slightly as he thought about the cosmic hierarchy. What about the abstract entities and those ridiculously heightier cosmic beings? From what he knew, unless he could eventually wield cosmic energy on their level, he probably wouldn't stand much of a chance against monsters capable of fucking with planets, stars, or entire solar systems as casually as a normal person swatted away a fly. All he could do was hope that, when the time finally came for him to control raw cosmic energy, his stubborn body wouldn't immediately decide to adapt to it by turning the damn thing into pure kinetic energy. Caleb, a gentle, melodic voice instantly snapped him out of his thoughts. Caleb looked up and saw Queen Frigga gracefully stepping into the chamber, her expression carrying both maternal warmth and obvious relief. "Ma'am," Caleb greeted, pushing himself up from the glowing remains of the magic circle with a light stretch. "Are you all right?" Frigga asked softly, stepping closer and looking him over with kind eyes. "Yeah, I'm holding up surprisingly well," Caleb chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck as he stood at his full height. "Feels like I just survived a cosmic blender, but all things considered, I think I came out on top. How's Jane, and Thor, Korg, Meek, and Victor?" "Jane has been sent back to Earth months ago," Frigga smiled reassuringly. "And my son and your friends are fine. They went with Thor to Midgard to help his Avengers deal with some trouble." Her smile turned mischievous. "As for Korg and Meek, I put a little illusion on them. To Midgardians, they'll just look like ordinary humans." "Thanks, ma'am," Caleb smiled as he was wondering about that. As for Victor, he didn't need such adjustments as he looked like humans already. Frigga's gaze softened even more, a playful yet warm glint appearing in her eyes. "I promised a grand Asgardian feast before Malekith's shadows fell upon us. I intend to make sure that promise is kept." "Oh, believe me, I haven't forgotten," Caleb grinned. "You look as though you've wrestled a dozen dark elves through the mud," Frigga gently teased. "A chamber has already been prepared for you. Freshen up, wash away the dust of the cosmos, and then we shall dine properly." Guided by the queen herself, Caleb was led through Asgard's huge archways to a luxurious guest chamber. Servants quickly prepared a steaming, aromatic bath filled with soothing magical herbs, their gentle effects easing the lingering tension in his muscles and leaving him feeling completely refreshed. After changing into fresh, finely woven Asgardian clothes, Caleb sat down for a hearty meal with Sif and the Warriors 3. Still, he didn't waste much time digging into the feast. From what he could remember about the timeline, this was the month when the Age of Ultron was about to kick off, or maybe it was the exact moment Thor and the rest of the Avengers were raiding Baron Strucker's Hydra base. Either way, this was the point where two major players, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, were about to step onto the board. There was no way he was missing out on that. He quickly finished his food, said a rushed goodbye to Sif, the Warriors 3, and Queen Frigga, then made a straight beeline for Heimdall at the Himmelbjorg Observatory. The Alcyon gatekeeper stood at his post in gleaming golden armor, his glowing orange eyes locked onto the endless cosmos. Caleb quickly told him where he wanted to go, and Heimdall simply gave him a knowing nod before plunging his greatsword, Hofund, into the control pedestal. The observatory spun to life, crackling with massive arcs of cosmic lightning, before the blinding beam of the Bifrost swallowed Caleb whole and launched him across the stars toward Midgard. Sokovia. The snowy forests of Sokovia had turned into a straight-up war zone, filled with repulsor blasts, heavy artillery, and the constant crash of metal being torn apart. The Avengers tore through Hydra's defensive lines with smooth, brutal coordination. Iron Man zipped through the sky, blasting reinforced bunkers into molten scrap, while Hulk roared as he ripped a heavy assault tank apart with his bare hands. Down on the ground, Victor moved like a human battering ram. His supersoldier strength let him casually knock Hydra soldiers aside as he dodged through their gunfire. Flanking him were Korg and Meek. Thanks to Frigga's illusions, both of them looked completely human to the enemy, though their appearances were still a little on the eccentric side. Korg, appearing as a ridiculously huge and muscular man, swung a massive club that smashed through Hydra exosuits with terrifying, rock-shattering force. Beside him, Meek appeared as a lithe woman with a deceptively delicate build. Frigga's illusion even made her bladed hands look completely human, hiding them beneath the illusion. She darted between the pine trees with frightening speed, her movements quick and precise as she took down heavily armed guards before they could even react. Captain America vaulted over a fallen tree, his shield ricocheting off 3 Hydra soldiers before snapping back onto his gauntlet, just as Thor summoned a massive bolt of lightning that fried a fortified watchtower. Black Widow and Hawkeye covered their 6, dropping any stragglers stupid enough to try flanking the heavy hitters. Hulk, too, was bulldozing through everything in his path, and no one could stand before him. Then, out of nowhere, the dark, overcast sky above Sokovia split wide open. The deafening roar of the Bifrost thundered across the mountain valley, completely drowning out the relentless gunfire. A blinding pillar of swirling, multicolored light slammed straight into the frozen earth in the middle of the battlefield. The impact sent a small shockwave through the area, knocking nearby Hydra soldiers off their feet and instantly vaporizing the snow within a 50-yard radius. The entire battlefield went dead silent. The Avengers froze, lowering their weapons as they stared toward the swirling dust and the scorching runic mark burned into the earth, waiting to see exactly who Asgard had just dropped into the middle of their warzone. To be continued.